Irish Breakdown Nation, IB Nation, Notre Dame fans all across this wonderful country and this globe. We are back. It is Wednesday, December 18th. We're going to talk about Notre Dame defense versus Indiana offense, Trevor. And you said something before the show, and it kind of hit me like, in 2 days. The game is in 2 days. We are 2 days away from Notre Dame taking on Indiana. It's a number 7 seed versus number 10 seed. It is the top 5 Fighting Irish against the top 10 Hoosiers when you look at the rankings, because rankings are different than seeding. It's an in-state battle. There's all the storylines, Trevor. This is going to be a big one, but this matchup today is going to be fun. This discussion today is going to be fun because we're going to dive strictly and specifically into a breakdown of the Notre Dame defense against the Indiana offense. These are the two sides of the ball that get the most discussion points when looking at the national folks and for various reasons. And it's going to be a really, really good, it's just a great matchup. And I think it's going to be a fun conversation, but man, I got to say, before we dive into that, Trev, I am excited to get rolling on this. 2 more days, man. We're going to be sitting out in Joyce parking lot, having some fun. My mom is, and I went over the menu last night. I'm going to be making my chicken chili. She's going to make some shredded roast beef sandwiches. We're going to have all types of her, she makes all those candies and stuff. She's going to make all that stuff. We're going to have a couple of people bringing in heaters, the tall heaters to have. One of the IB members is going to partner with us to give us a lot more space. He's talking about maybe bringing out his grill or his smoker, for it. So, I mean, we're going to have some fun. We're going to have hot drinks, cold drinks. It's going to be a lot of fun. And of course, we'll be there all day enjoying it. We're going to probably get set up around 1 or 2 o'clock, hopefully close to 1 o'clock on Friday, and be there all day. And it's going to be a blast, man. And we're going to talk Notre Dame football, maybe share some things that we can't put on the message board, that we can't put out in writing. We'll be there to answer any of your questions, just to talk with you, meet with you, have a good time. I'm looking forward to it, Trevor. And then, of course, 8 o'clock that night, we'll all be inside the stadium or sitting at home on TV, getting ready for Notre Dame versus Indiana. Cannot wait.
Listen, buddy, if it were up to me, I'd be in the tailgating lot right now. I think it hit me this morning. I think I woke up today, and what I was telling you, I was like, okay, we get through today, crank out some articles. We got the show. Tomorrow I got some articles and then the show. And then after that, I'm hightailing it up to South Bend to crash at my dad's. And then it's there, man. I mean, it's how I felt, and I think it's probably just because, it's December, Christmas is a week away. How I felt when I was a child, when Christmas was about to happen, is how I feel right now as a 27-year-old getting ready for this Notre Dame Indiana playoff game, man. I mean, it can't come fast enough. And obviously, how much we've been talking about it and diving into the film. And I'm tired of watching film. I'm tired of speculating. I'm ready to watch the game.
Speculating, I'm good with. I'm never tired of watching film, my friend. Never tired of watching film. But no, I totally get your point in all seriousness. This is a matchup, Trev, that you just look at and say, I just want to know. It's like we talked about it. It almost feels like we're kind of back to the preseason where, we'd sit there and say, like, look, I think this team's going to be good. I think this team has a shot to compete for a title, but I just want to know. Are they really as good as we think? And then, of course, the team kind of started to show itself during the year, different times and the ups and downs. But it's a different type of season because of the 4-game playoff. Now it's like, okay, it's a whole different animal now, and like, are they really as good as we think they are? Did they really just beat up on a weak schedule? And they're not really, they're a good top 8 to 10 team, but they're not a top 2 to 3 team. Like, we don't know the answer to that. And we're going to start to find that answer out on Friday night. And that's the exciting part. It is that anticipation of, okay, well, we're going to find out. We're going to find out now. And boy, it's going to be a wild night. It's going to be just the number of people I've talked to, there's reports that there's going to be over 100,000 people in town for the game, and it's going to be great for our community. I'm live in the region, so it's going to be great for our community. That so many people are coming in, but it's just it's a new era of college football, and as we've said all week, it's appropriate that Notre Dame is the one kicking that off, and the traditional blue blood against the upstart basketball school that said, hey, you know what, we've decided we want to be pretty good at football too. And that's what's going to make this to me make this first round game even more fun and more exciting.
Yeah, I'm ready. I mean, you look at it, and Notre Dame Stadium has been around for so long, and it's been such an iconic center of college football that you don't get to experience a lot of firsts. So when you throw that number out there of, estimated 100,000 people coming into town, me being one of them, I mean, it's going to be a lot of fun. I don't get to experience that many firsts, and so yeah, my first experience in that stadium was 06 UCLA. Not a bad game to go to.
Just keep rubbing that in, don't you?
I
Mine
do,
was
man.
07 USC. So yeah, you win that one. You definitely win that one.
But it's cool. I got to experience that game with my dad, and then I'll be up in South Bend this Friday night with my dad. And after the week that we've had, it's going to be awesome to bring that all together. Now, hoping for the best result at the end of Friday night, right? But the experience alone is going to be awesome. But this is going to be a matchup of, to your point, Brian, what everybody's talking about, the national media is talking about, the best on best matchup, the Mike Shanahan versus Al Golden, the number 4 scoring defense versus the number 2 scoring offense. This is what makes this fun. Now, this is what makes it so interesting to talk about. I mean, we could go into detail about this for so long, which I know that we are.
Yes.
But looking at it big picture, best on best matchups, you brought it up the other day. If you like chess matches, if you like good football, you're in for a treat on Friday night. I'll say that.
If you like well-coached football, for sure.
Yeah.
This is the game for you, and that's what we'll continue to reiterate, Trevor, and it's on both sides of the ball. I don't think Tino Sunseri taking the UCLA job is going to really have that much of an impact on them. I believe he's still with the team right now, and he's not the primary OC and play caller. I believe that is Mike Shanahan, so I don't think that's going to have the kind of impact. Like you remember, well, actually, you may not remember because I think that was the year you were born, but when Mark Richt left Florida State, and he was trying to get ready. He was going to become the head coach at Georgia, and he was trying to do both, and the offense just looked abysmal in the championship game against Oklahoma. I don't think that's going to be an issue here. I think you're going to get the best of what both of these teams have to offer, and we're going to find out who the better team is, and that's going to be what's decided here, Trev. But, it's interesting. There's two very similar storylines about these two units, and they fit the same kind of track. The one is the people that recognize, like, I don't care what your schedule is, when you put up the kind of numbers these two units are putting up, the Notre Dame defense and then the US and then the Indiana offense, when you rank 3rd in scoring defense and you rank 2nd in scoring offense and you're a top 10 team in total defense and yards per play, which Notre Dame is, when you're a top 10 red zone defense, when you're a top 10 third down defense, number 1 in the country in turnovers gained, when you're a number 2 scoring offense in the country, you're top 15 in yards per play, you're a top 5 red zone defense, you're a borderline top 10 third down offense. I said red zone defense, I meant red zone offense. And you're number 3 in the country in limiting turnovers. I don't care who you played. You're very good. And both of these units are very good. And then there's the counter argument, which comes more so from the SEC circles, if we're being honest, which is, well, they didn't play anybody. They didn't do this. They didn't do that. And they're not that good. They're a little overrated. I've heard a lot of people talk about the Notre Dame defense is overrated and it's not that good. And, well, Indiana scored a bunch of points against nobodies. I'm like, guys, Indiana was a nobody for 50 years until this past year, right? Like, when you do what Indiana's doing and you're scoring 40 points a game on a bunch of Big Ten teams week after week after week after week, you're not a fluke. You're not an average team that just beats up on a bunch of nobodies. That's what good teams do. That's what the best teams do, is they dominate those opponents. And then we also saw some of those, SEC powerhouses would go play 6-6 football teams and get beat. And Notre Dame and Indiana clearly didn't do that. So Indiana played plenty of 6-6 teams that could have beat them this year, and none of them came close. Notre Dame played plenty of 6-7 win teams this year. Actually, they didn't play that many because over half their schedule had 7 or more wins, but you get the point. And they didn't lose those games. They won those games and often dominated those games. And so that's what good teams do. And so you have the competing storylines about these two units, which kind of is interesting. But I think the majority of people that know football, that watch football, that don't get into the hype and the storylines, they just get into, hey, I'm watching the film, I'm looking at the numbers. They understand that this is going to be a really good matchup. And this is genuinely two good, really, really outstanding units and extremely well-coached units that are facing each other, Trevor. And that's what makes it fun, right? I mean, this is, you could say, well, Notre Dame has a talent advantage. In some spots, yes, it's significant. In other spots, it's a little closer than maybe some Notre Dame fans would want to admit. From a coaching standpoint, there haven't been a whole lot of offensive coaches that you could watch and say, based on what we've seen on film from them, they're going to be able to go toe-to-toe and out-duel Al Golden and his staff. This is one of them that you say, if Al Golden and his staff aren't on top of their game, this is one that could give them problems. And for me, that's the thing that I get most excited about is these are two extremely well-coached units. And if you're someone who appreciates that, I think you're going to really enjoy that because you know that whoever wins this battle will have earned it from a preparation standpoint and an execution standpoint. And that's also part of what makes this matchup exciting. I mean, you have an offense that scores 43.3 points per game going up against a defense that gives up 13.6 points per game. That's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, man. I mean, I've said it the last couple of weeks is the playoffs are an opportunity for teams to either prove people right or prove people wrong, right? Depending on where you fall on certain opinions. And when you look at this matchup with Notre Dame's defense and Indiana's offense, they have the opportunity to go prove a lot of people right. You know, Notre Dame's defense has the opportunity to go prove people like us right that are very high on this team. And yeah, albeit their schedule might not have been the toughest in the world, but they played 7 teams above 6-6. You know, they played 7 bowl eligible or 8 bowl eligible teams. So, you know, did they have Georgia's schedule? No, but nobody had Georgia's schedule, right? Did Indiana play a bunch of the top teams in the Big Ten? No, but they handled every single team that they beat, right? With the exception of Michigan. But again, if you go through and you watch that game, Michigan had a chance, I guess.
That was
at
closer
the end.
to being like Notre Dame Louisville than it was a game they were going to lose. I mean,
yeah.
Did they ever trail? I don't think they ever trailed in that game. Maybe Michigan was up 3-0.
I think Michigan was up
3-0.
Yeah, Michigan was up 3-0, and then I think at one point it might have been tied, but I don't think Indiana.
Well, they were up
trailed.
14-3 at one point in time. So if Michigan led on them 3-0, then that was the only lead Michigan had. I think they got it to 17-15 at one point in time. But yeah, I mean that was a game that it was 17-3 at one point in the second half. Trev, and it was just like, you know what I mean? So it's like, yes, Michigan made it close at the end, and they made it maybe you are correct. Michigan led 3-0, and then Indiana scored the next 17 points. Michigan then scored the next 12, and then Indiana finished it off with a field goal to make it a 5-point game at the end.
Yeah,
but they trailed for less than 4 minutes of that football game, and then never trailed again. It was never tied again after that touchdown.
Right. And so a lot of people are letting the final score kind of indicate what their feelings are for that game. But again, it just kind of adds fuel to the fire of Indiana also has a chance to go prove a lot of their doubters wrong, you know, and prove a lot of their fans right. You know, can Indiana perform in that big game on offense? Can they do the things that they did against, you know, Maryland and Northwestern and Michigan State? Can they do that to, you know, an Ohio State caliber team? Can they do that to a Michigan caliber team? So on defense. So it's going to be interesting to see, you know, watching all of this unfold and all of those narratives kind of fuel into why this game is going to be so exciting to watch, you know, and then you add in the big name players that each team has on either side of the ball. You know, Notre Dame's defense, they have Xavier Watts, they have Riley Mills, they have an exciting true freshman in Leonard Moore, they have Christian Gray, you know, they have Howard Cross, IU, they have 2 really good running backs, they have Elijah Surratt, they have Curtis Rourke, you know, they have a plethora of slot receivers that we're going to talk about later today that, you know, basically all act like a bunch of mini Jordan Faisons within their offense, you know. So this is going to be a really, really fun matchup to watch. You know, they're very experienced. So you know, it's going to be one to watch. We have a lot of content coming out about it, man. And it's the more you dive into it, the more even it does seem when you look deep into both teams.
Right. Yeah, and this offense is a lot like the other one, Trevor, where this offense has nothing to lose. Everybody expects Notre Dame, oh, you know, look what happened against Ohio State. Notre Dame's going to shut them down. They have nothing to lose. And guess what? They're going to coach that way, and they're going to play that way. It's going to come down to really getting the job done. So I can't wait to see it, Trev. I can't wait to watch this matchup. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to get into some specifics of the matchup, but I just think big picture, this is a big one. And you know, we talked about it. I don't know that Notre Dame beating Indiana or shutting down the Indiana offense is going to convince the college football world that Notre Dame is as good as we say they are. I don't think it will. I think the storyline is going to be, well, this is why Indiana didn't belong. I think we've talked about that. Well, this is why Bama should have got in, right? And so we heard that about TCU a couple years ago. well, this is why Georgia should have got in or whoever else would have got on. The teams like that can't win. I'm like, we're just ignoring the fact that TCU beat Michigan in the first round. It wasn't like they got in the Final Four and got obliterated 65-7 in the first round or the semifinals. They beat a big-time power team and then got obliterated in the championship game. And so you're going to hear a lot of that excuse making afterwards. So I don't know that it changes the narrative, but practically speaking, the Notre Dame defense getting back on track against an offense this explosive with this kind of balance does kind of right the ship a little bit after the way they finished against USC and gets them in position to where they can then go change the narrative in future games against a Georgia or a Penn State and, potentially an Oregon or an Ohio State or a Tennessee or a Texas or a Clemson in the championship game if they're able to advance that bar. So I think for me, it's more so about getting back on track than it is about changing any type of narrative, because I don't know that there's anything Notre Dame can do to Indiana that is big picture going to change the narrative. There will be some football people. If Notre Dame shuts down Indiana, you'll hear Greg McElroy praising the job Notre Dame did and say, maybe Indiana wasn't a top 10 team, but that's a really good offense, and Notre Dame did this and did this. And there will be some football people like that will give Notre Dame the praise that they deserve. But that's not really what I care about. I care about getting into rhythm, getting going, getting on track, getting your confidence up so that you can be in position to go win your next football game. And that's what's at stake for Notre Dame is that for this unit. And that's what's going to make it interesting. So we're going to get into the specific breakdowns next, folks. But hey, before we get too far into the show, do us a favor. Y'all see that little thumbs up button down there? Go ahead and hit that like button for us. If you're not a subscriber to the channel, go ahead and do that. Hit that notification bell, and then hopefully YouTube will let you know. They haven't been some people have had some issues with getting that, obviously, but this is why it's good to follow me on Twitter at Coach D178. It's also why it's good to be on the premium message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com, because I post the shows we do on Twitter and on the message board before we go live. So you'll always see those on there. You'll be able to get to those shows and see that we're doing that. So make sure you're doing that as well. So Trevor, when we dive into this matchup, the first thing that you look at is the Notre Dame run defense against the Indiana rush offense, because we're going to talk about the pass part second, because that's the side that most people think of when they think of Indiana's offense, and the thing they think of Notre Dame's defense is what a great pass defense and what a great, pass offense. And that's going to be a great battle, and we're going to have a lot of talk about it. But I think talking about the run game first is vitally important. And something that I have said for years, and something that I've noticed from you and comments you've made when Notre Dame plays teams like this and we break down games like this, is that you understand how important it is, if a team is a really good throwing team, to not allow them to have some semblance of balance. And there's a lot of talk about how Indiana's this high octane pass game that throws it all over the yard. And I'm like, yeah, they're really not. They only rank 29th nationally in passing yards per game. They've had a couple big games where they've thrown the ball around and they've put up big yards. And what I think happens is when people only watch you play a couple times and you throw the ball really well those couple times, they start to assume that that's just who you are all the time. And if you look at Indiana this season, Trevor, they've had 5 games they went over 300 yards, but they've had several games that they've won big games and they've been barely over 200. And so this is a very good passing team, but this is a team that when they're at their best is a balanced football team. Is what they do best throw the football? Absolutely. They're top 10 in yards per play, or yards per attempt, yards per completion percentage, touchdowns. They're number 1 in passer rating, all that. Their pass game is legit. But you and I have talked about this, Trev. When this offense is rolling, they are balanced. They're running the football. And when you look at the numbers, Trevor, we go to the run game numbers here, they're not a lights out rushing team, right, from a number standpoint, but I don't think the numbers necessarily do justice to how important the run game is to what they do. And this is a team that this season has had 5 different games where they've gone over 200 yards. Now, what hurt them and what dragged this number down is they only had 123 combined yards in win over Michigan and the loss to Ohio State. That dragged them down from being closer to 200 yards per game. That right there shows why it's so important to focus on this part of the game, which also is not the strength of the Notre Dame defense. We've talked about that. If you can make them one-dimensional, you have a better shot at slowing them down. If they're coming out and they're running the ball on you and the RPO game is rolling and the different things that they're doing there, that makes this team a lot harder to defend. We're going to talk about what makes their run defense work and or rush game work and what Notre Dame needs to do to stop it. But I think that's a big picture. That's a key part to focus on is you have to make this team one-dimensional. You've mentioned, Trevor, that Maryland and Northwestern, 2 games at Indiana, did not really blow that team out early. They pulled away those games late. And you've talked a lot about that. And for context, to kind of to back up your point, they beat Maryland by 14, 42-28. But at one point in time, that was a 28-21 game going into the fourth quarter. It was 21-21 in the third quarter. And they obviously pulled the game away late and won convincingly in the fourth quarter. Northwestern and Indiana were 24-17 going into the fourth quarter, and with 6.5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, it was a 3-point football game. And Indiana scored twice late to put it away. Indiana did not run the ball very well in either of those games. They were at 151 against Maryland, 149 against Northwestern. Against Nebraska, 215 yards, 6.5 yards per carry. They ran Nebraska off the field in that game. And it was one of the more impressive balanced performances. And then against Washington, when they had their backup quarterback in the game, they grinded out 188 really tough yards. They were sub 4 per carry, but they grinded that game down. And we've seen it. I mean, we've seen this team, when they struggle to run the ball, their offense can take some time to get rolling. And I think that's going to be a key part of this game for Notre Dame is to make them a little bit more one-dimensional. Or, I mean, like, you're going to give up some runs, but I don't know if Notre Dame can kind of do what they did against Louisville and some of those other teams. You're kind of almost daring them to run, because I think this team is more able to hurt you with that. This team doesn't have to throw the ball, in my opinion, where Jeff Brom wants to throw the football. I don't know that Indiana's that same way, Trev.
Yeah, man, look, I'm going to say it until I'm blue in the face. In big games, when it means the most, running the football is what means the most. I've said it once. I'll say it again. I'll probably say it again before the week is over. Look at what happened in the championship week. The teams that were in it and the teams that even, the teams that won had good games on the ground for the most part outside of Clemson, right? But look at SMU. One of the reasons why they were back in it, they were able to run the football effectively. One of the reasons why Penn State was able to hang around in a shootout is because they had 2 running backs go over 100 yards. The reason why Georgia was able to pull away in the second half and ultimately win in overtime is the Texas defense wanted nothing to do with Trevor Etienne in the second half. And it's not like it was a mystery what Georgia was going to do when Carson Beck didn't come back into the football game, right? Like, I don't think anybody on the Texas sideline was like, man, Gunnar Stockton's about to dice us up. Like, you know what I'm saying? So running
our
the football
worst fears have come true. The backups in the game. Oh no, we're so screwed.
Right. Which just even feeds more into the point that it's hilarious that the Texas linebackers were playing 4 yards off of the line of scrimmage at the 1 yard line, but that is what it is. But running the football is massive. You just pointed out why Indiana has been effective in the games that they've played that aren't close. Look at what they did to Nebraska, the games that were a little bit closer, that were wins. Maryland, Northwestern, Michigan, they weren't really able to establish the ground game that well. One of the biggest reasons why Ohio State's defense played so well, yes, their pass rush played great, their secondary played great against a good receiving core, but Indiana could not generate a ground game to save their lives. And that's when you take away such a stable foundation of a balanced offense, it makes it really tough. I think the world of Curtis Rourke, and I think he's going to be one of the better passers, one of the best that Notre Dame has faced this season. But he is helped out quite a bit from a good run game, right? We're going to dive more into that when we talk about IU's passing game. But this goes to show why whoever controls the line of scrimmage on offense and defense in this football game is going to really increase their odds of winning this football game. Because as good as IU's passing attack is, they're not a team that is going to come out and just rip you up for 410 yards if their running game isn't working.
And the other thing too, Trevor, is a big part, and we'll get into some more specifics here in a little bit, but a big part of their passing game statistically is RPOs and play action passes. If the run game's not going, then that makes it a lot harder to do that. And the other thing too is What makes this offense a little different from Louisville's, for example, is Louisville had a really explosive group of players at quarterback and at receiver where they could get into a 3rd and 10 and be fine and make a big play. Indiana is a team that more so has to stay on schedule in a game like this, where they need to get into more second and mediums and shorts and thirds and shorts and mediums. I don't know that you want to be putting this team in a bunch of 3rd and 9s and 3rd and 10s and then expect them to just go out there and out athlete Notre Dame. I don't think that's really going to be as effective in this game. But when they're running the RPO game and their run game is going, and you have to start getting your safeties involved in the game, that's when they start pulling the ball, getting it outside, getting it on the perimeter. And a lot of that is based off their run game working. And if the run game's working, I think that takes a lot away from what makes them a high efficiency offense, is the fact that they do all those things in the RPO game. And if you're shutting the run game down, then the RPO game, may not be as effective.
Right.
If you're depending on how you're shutting the run game down. But that's why the front is so important for Notre Dame.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so for those who, still might not believe that the running game is important, and if a team can pass, that's all that matters. The stat that opened my eyes to this, because full transparency, I used to be that way. I used to be, if you can pass all over a team, it doesn't matter. And then I took a deep dive into the 2019 LSU team, right? And who are the names that people think of? Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Terrace Marshall. But nobody talks about Clyde Edwards-Helaire from that season. He had 1,400 rushing yards to average 6.6 yards per carry and had 16 rushing touchdowns. So even in an offense that is just most identified by their air-it-out passing attack and nobody could stop their trio of wide receivers, they had a 1,400-yard rusher, and it's not like he rushed the ball and it was just all big explosive plays. He had 212 carries that year. Running the football is huge in big games. It's massive. And so for Notre Dame's run defense, they're going to be tasked with doing something that has been a little inconsistent this year. They've shown at times when they really put in a lot of effort and commit the resources to stopping the run, they can. The example I'm always going to go back to is what they did to Jamal Haynes the week after he went for $170 and 2 touchdowns, right? Because that is an impressive performance. But then there have been times, a little bit earlier in the year, I think it would have been a little bit more interesting to see what would have happened with USC if Woody Marks didn't get hurt, because that sample size is a little weird. But Notre Dame's run defense has been inconsistent this season at stopping the run. And that's something that Indiana does when they're humming on offense. That's something that they do really well. So I think that's what's going to make this matchup really interesting.
So when you talk about the Indiana run game, Trev, let's get into some of the specifics of it. And the first thing is they're not a real complicated run game. And when I say that, it's meant to be a compliment, because I feel like they don't need to out-scheme you to be good, because they have good pieces in the run game. And so when I break them down, Trev, I see a lot of inside zone, and they'll do some different variations of it. They'll run base inside zone with the backside tight end. Sometimes they'll do, if they really think you're hurting them, they'll put 2 tight ends backside. They do a lot more 12 personnel than people might think, especially in the run game, because they're comfortable with their play action and RPO game and drop back game, beating you with 2 receivers and Zach Horton at tight end. So they'll do that. They're mostly an 11 personnel team, but they'll do a good chunk of 12 personnel, and especially in the run game when they're really trying to get the run game going. So they'll do that. They'll do split flow inside zone, where basically the tight end comes from the front side and he blocks back. That's just split flow. They'll also do what we've seen from Notre Dame a little bit, which is that inside zone load, where they'll kind of lock zone it on the backside and fold that tight end up inside to kind of lead if they're having trouble getting to an inside linebacker on their inside zone. They'll run lock zone off of it, especially with their RPO game. So they'll do a lot inside zone a lot of different ways. They'll do that 11 personnel. They'll do that of empty, not an empty backfield, but like no one attached to the tight ends in the slot. The other 3 receivers are outside. They'll do it with a lot of motion to try to get your linebacker eye discipline off. And then, of course, they run a ton of RPO off the inside zone. A ton of. That's their primary run play with which they do inside zone. So you're going to see that. But they also run outside zone and stretch. So they actually – Notre Dame has like one version of outside zone. It's just outside zone. It's an off tackle play. They will do that, but they'll also go stretch out of pistol and run a stretch outside zone, which hits differently. It's a longer developing play, slower developing play. Their outside zone is a lot like Notre Dame's outside zone. It's a quick hitting outside zone. It's an off tackle play, and it's going to most likely be a vertical insertion. they'll run stretch, which is more of a slow developing zone play where it's stretch, and then you either hit it up inside or you bounce it. They'll run some counter as well. Not a ton, but they'll definitely run some counter. And if they think they can get you on that and they can log you and bounce it outside, they'll hit their counter. They really like being able to bounce counter. I've noticed, Trevor, is they'll do a lot where if they think they can get you weak side, so they'll put like two tights front side or a tight end front side, and they'll do their counter. I've seen them do counter tray, but for mostly what I've seen, Trevor, is like the more modern counter with the guard and the tight end. And so they'll log that guy, and then if they can get that tight end around, they'll bounce that sucker. They like to bounce counter quite a bit. They'll also go with the vertical insertion, obviously, but they like to run it in looks where they can get you to where maybe if that end squeezes, they can get that thing around. That tight end comes around, he gets up to the second level, sees a linebacker, and then they're off to the races. So they like to do a lot of that. It's not super complicated in scheme, but they do a really good job of formationally getting you into some numbers and leverage binds. That's what I like about their run game. And that's how a run game should be, in my opinion. It's not running 18 different plays or 9 different variations of your 5 or 6 plays. It's we're going to run our stuff. Our base play will run some variations of, but we're going to put you in some unique gap situation problems. We're going to put you into some leverage problems. They're going to use motion to try to get your linebackers, mess with it. If they don't respect that motion at all, they'll just come back and throw a swing route, jet sweep, things like that. And those are different aspects of it, Trev. Like their first touchdown against Maryland was literally a swing route to their receiver because Maryland was just loading the box and he just walks into the end zone. It was considered a run, but he threw it backwards. That's why they called it a run to Miles Cross. And so when I looked at the box score, I was like, Miles Cross, 1 yard touchdown run. What the heck was that? I'm like, did they do? And then you break down the film. You're like, oh, there you go. That's how they got to it. So it's not real difficult in that regard. They'll do some things. And I think with Notre Dame especially, I think they're going to do some bunch stuff. I expect them to do some motion stuff to try to get Notre Dame down in and get outside against Notre Dame's man defense. We've seen teams in November do that a decent amount to Notre Dame where they'll kind of crack down inside and just quick pitch it or run an outside zone and get it outside. And then, they can kind of seal everybody off because the corners are going to squeeze down on that. Notre Dame's going to have some plans for that. And then the big thing is you've got to be gap sound because what makes their run game work, Trevor, we'll talk about the line here in a second, but these are very smart backs that make good decisions, and they're tough to bring down in space with just one guy.
Yeah. I mean, both Justice Ellison and Tyson Lawton, really strong, hard runners. They're not burners by any means. I mean, they're not slow, but they don't have a whole lot of breakaway runs against teams with similar skill level. Right. When they're in their bag on offense is when they showcase the ability to be able to move the ball north and south, because I think that speaks to who they have in their run game personnel. Right. To your point, they don't do a lot of creative things in the run game. And it's because they are relying on their guys and playing into their strengths of, they don't have a crazy athletic offensive line. So they're not doing a whole lot of pin and pull stuff. They're not pulling a lot of guards. They will when they run counter, but not anything as creative with what Notre Dame's run game has been in certain aspects this season, right? They're a very north and south run-oriented football team, which I think, to your point, I think that's why they're able to bounce counters sometimes. Like, I think that's why they're able to get outside zone effective sometimes, because there's a lot of teams that are accounting for, hey, this is coming in between the tackles with how much inside zone that they run. Mm-hmm. Everything gets sucked in. So, yeah, it's for Notre Dame, and I know we're going to get to that side of the ball in a second, but it's going to be, to your point, has to be gap sound. Going to have to do a good job of bringing down really tough runners. Mm-hmm. I mean, the one thing that was evident through the film and through all the games that I watched of Justice Ellison and Tyson Lawton, not a whole lot of first attempted tacklers bring them down first try. It's got to be, hats to the football, a lot of gold helmets surrounding the football, which they've done a good job of this year, but now it's on the biggest stage, and they're going to have to do it then.
The other thing too, Trevor, when you look at this team is we said on defense, they know who they are. Mm-hmm. And that's true of their offense. You know why they don't pull a lot? Because they don't have very athletic offensive linemen. They have big physical kids that like to maul people, and that's what they ask them to do. Yeah. And that's smart. And that's the other thing about them is we talked yesterday, or was it 2 days ago when we were previewing this game, that, Bob Bostad is their offensive line coach. He's a guy that I have a great deal of respect for from his time at Wisconsin. He was one of the early coaches that really got that Wisconsin run game rolling and played a huge role in that before he left for the NFL and took his services to that next level and was able to go to that level and do some things. But he's another guy he's another part of it is this looks like a lot like one of those old Wisconsin offensive lines where they're not super athletic. They're not a bunch of stiff bums. Like don't get us twisted. We're not like sitting there talking about this team sucks and they're not going to run on anybody. And that's not what we're saying. It's just know who you are, right? I mean, like last year, one of the big complaints we had about Notre Dame last year was they ran way too much pin and pull with guards who could not move the way you need a pin and pull offensive lineman to be. It's know who you are, play to your strengths, and they do a great job of playing to their strengths. I give them a lot of credit for that. And that's what they are. They're a big physical offensive line that plays well together. And that's why they're such a heavy inside zone, outside zone, stretch type of team, because that's all generated on creating movement. And they do a pretty good job of that. And they're very, very well coached on the offensive line. Like, one thing we've praised Notre Dame for the last 6 games is how well their unit plays together. Indiana's kind of been that way all year with their offensive line, Trevor. They play really well together. You have to find ways to exploit their lack of athleticism if you're going to hurt them. If this just becomes a grinded out type of game and Notre Dame's not getting penetration and not being aggressive, they'll start to lean on Notre Dame in the fourth quarter. You've got to make this a game where it's about our speed versus your size. That's what the Notre Dame coaches have to be thinking about when you're looking at from their perspective when I say our, but that's got to be their mentality. If we're faster, we're more athletic, we need to take advantage of it. That's what the Notre Dame coaches need to be focusing on. And if you can do that, and like Maryland did that early, Michigan did that a little bit early, with some different stunts, but Maryland had a lot of success early on of creating some negatives in the run game because they were using their twists and stunts and blitzes and things like that effectively. And that kind of slowed the Indiana offense down a little bit. They didn't score their first touchdown until the second quarter. And I think they scored once in their first 4 possessions, I believe, in that game. And then eventually the pass game started to take over. But that's something that kept the score down. If you can keep them off the board the first quarter of the game, you could hopefully be in a pretty good position there if your own offense can step up and start doing some things.
We talk a lot about the experience along that Indiana offensive line. And I think they have something like 148 combined offensive starts. You rattled off a couple of days ago how many combined snaps that they all have. And on top of really good coaching, another good key indicator of why this offensive line is so good is you have a bunch of guys that are really good at self-scouting. They've played a lot of football. They know what they're good at, right? They maximize their own potential after the coaches kind of put them in the right position to make all the right plays, right? That's why they're not asking them to go do a lot of pin and pull things. That's why they're not asking their guards to pull on every other run play, So, I think it just all speaks to why this offense runs so well. I think it speaks to why this Indiana team is who they are. They have a bunch of guys that have played a lot of football that have really good self-scouting. And what they do well, they do extremely well. They move people off the ball well. They're big, burly offensive linemen. I think across the board, it's one of the biggest offensive lines Notre Dame has played this season. So it's going to be a tall order. It's going to be the strength and size of the Indiana offensive line versus the speed of Notre Dame. It's kind of similar to that, what we talked about for the SMU Penn State game. Like, what's going to kind of give first? Is it going to be the speed and athleticism? Is it going to be the strength and the size? Not that Notre Dame doesn't also have strength and size. It's just across the board for Indiana's offensive line. They have all guys, I think, that are over 300 pounds, and outside of their center, I think they're all 6'5". So it's going to be a good battle in the trenches, man. It's going to be a good one.
So what can Notre Dame's run defense do to slow down Indiana? Number one is you've got to dominate inside. And they've got very good veteran guards, but they're not overly athletic. And that's where Ohio State hurt them. That's where Maryland hurt them. That's where Michigan started to get to them in the second and third quarter to slow them down as they started to win right up the middle. And so obviously you're going to need big games from Riley Mills and Howard Cross. You're going to need Gabriel Rubio to be on top of his game. You're going to need Donovan Hinish to be on top of his game. When this defensive tackle unit has been at its best, teams just do not run on Notre Dame.
Yep.
When teams have run on Notre Dame, it's because it really comes down to mostly the interior guys aren't playing dominant football.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to see how Howard Cross is going to look. He's had over a month off now with the high ankle injury, missed the last 3 games of the regular season. And then also, 2 weeks before the game week got here, 3 weeks before the game, but 2 weeks before you really get to the game prep. And hopefully he's rested and ready to go play big-time football. And so, for Howard Cross, who's a smaller guy, I always worry about smaller guys wearing down later in the season. Some of the injury issues he had, which kind of hurt him during the season, Trevor, could end up being a blessing if he's healthy now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, not that it's like, if he's banged up in the playoffs, that doesn't help him. But if he was able to heal from the hamstring and the ankle and all the different things that have plagued him all year, this could be a little bit of a blessing in disguise for Notre Dame because they were able to limit his snaps.
Mm-hmm.
Howard Cross goes into the postseason, Trevor, with 369 snaps this year. He played 610 last year. So he'd have to play 50 snaps a game, almost 50 snaps a game, and play 4 games to pass what he did last year. He played more snaps than that in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Where he played 477. And so you wonder, like, does that keep him a little bit fresher maybe than he would have otherwise been had he played 12 full healthy games? Obviously, I would have rather had Howard Cross healthy all year, but you get what I'm saying? Like, I wonder how much that's going to impact, kind of how fresh he might be here in the postseason if he's healthy after last season. Whereas Riley Mills is only 15 snaps away from what he was last season in 13 games. So he's had to kind of take on some of that burden, but getting Howard Cross healthy is going to be important. And then the other thing is Notre Dame has very young linebackers.
Mm-hmm.
I fully expect Indiana to try to do things to confuse Notre Dame's young linebackers with the motions, the shifts, the misdirection type of things. Maybe even like a read zone, some different things like that where they're throwing the ball in the backfield. I think they're going to put some very interesting wrinkles at this Notre Dame linebacking core to try to slow them down a little bit. Can the linebackers play savvy veteran football, even though they're not veterans? That's going to be a big part of this game too. One miss run fit against this run game, and it's a 15-yard gain on a cutback. Right? They're not home run hitters, Trevor. And I think you mentioned that earlier. They're not home run hitters. They're guys that, rip off 15, 20, 25-yard runs if you make a mistake. If you get logged, if you're the edge player and you get logged and they bounce it out, they're going to go for 15, 20 yards. That's who they are. If you're someone who hits the B gap instead of the A gap, or the A gap instead of the B gap on the backside, these two backs are going to cut it back and get you for 10, 15 yards. They're going to gash you, and that's the stuff that you got to try to avoid. We're like Louisville's backs, like if you let them get a hold, they could hit home runs, man. Like they had home run hitters. These kids will wear you down because they're not listed very big, but you look at them, they're thick kids. Justin Ellison and Tyson Lawton are thick kids. They're a lot like Jadarian Price built in the lower body. And they can take a pounding and they can give a pounding. And so that's something that I could see being a big part of that. If they start leaning on Notre Dame early, that could be a problem. But you got to be gap sound in this game. That's a big part of this game. You got to be gap sound and use your athleticism to your advantage. Those to me are very big keys for Notre Dame to shut down this Indiana run game. If they can do that, I don't know that Indiana has a lot of answers with their run game. It's just, okay, well, let's have to throw the ball a little bit more. And I think those are – and the more you can stop the run game with your front seven and box, especially like your 4 down and your 2 backers, the more you can use Xavier Watts and Adon Schuler to play the alleys and play the RPOs and to play the screen game, the more effective you're going to be. Because if you have to start triggering the safeties down into the box to slow down the run game, that's when their screen game becomes a problem. That's when their RPO game starts to hurt you. And that's why it's so important that the D-line and the linebackers play at a very high level in this game, Trev.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it starts with the interior of the defensive line. Like there's a direct correlation between when Riley Mills and Howard Cross, or when Gabe Rubio and Don Heinisch, some combination of, those 4 guys, when they don't play well in the run game, it doesn't allow the linebackers to fit and fill where they need to be, right? And so it starts there. It starts at the interior. Another nugget that I'll add, the edge rushers this year, the edge players for Notre Dame, have done a pretty decent job, I would say, in the run game, turning things back inside for the most part. It's going to have to be more of the same. You know what I mean? Like Josh Burnham is going to kind of continue to do what he did in the run game this year. RJ Oben has been pretty good in the run game. Pass rush, another conversation for another day. But in the run game, RJ Oben's been pretty steady, right? I'm really high on Bryce Young as a pass rusher. But how is he going to fare in a run game? Because he's going to get his fair share of snaps on Friday night. So how is he going to fare in the run game? You know what I mean? So defensive line holds a major key there. But you're absolutely right. The linebackers are going to have to do a good job of playing assignment correct football because these two guys have really good vision and they're really hard to bring down. So not only can they hurt you and gash you for 10 to 15 yards, which is something that we're going to talk about tomorrow in Keys to Victory, limiting chunk plays, but you have to make sure that, if they are able to get north and south on you, they're not going to be like some of these other running backs that aren't as big that you can just kind of bring down one-on-one in the open field. If you can, it's going to be a long day for Indiana's offense, but I'm not going to bank on that in the same way that I'm not going to bank on Indiana's defense just stopping Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price because no team has been able to do that so far. There's been very few teams that have been able to limit what Indiana's been able to do on offense, is specifically in their run game. So linebackers are going to have to be there.
We talked about the strengths. We've talked about the concerns. I feel like we got a good handle on it. This is going to be a very intriguing part of this matchup. And I think when you look at the Notre Dame run game, I think that's an aspect of this defense that I think is a little underrated. And they've had their moments, right? We've talked about that. They've had their moments. They've had their moments where the run game wasn't great. I didn't think it was great against USC at times. They didn't do a lot of things great against USC. It was a very it was an abnormally sloppy game from the Notre Dame rush defense. But outside of that, I think for the most part, they've done pretty well outside of that game in Northern Illinois. Those are the two games where I thought the run defense struggled. A&M started to lean on them a little bit late in that game with just some 6s and some 7s, and Notre Dame looked a little bit tired, and then they kind of buckled down and shut them down late. But Texas A&M went for 146 yards and only 3.8 yards per carry. That wasn't exactly a dominant performance, and that's a Texas A&M team that averaged 198.2 rushing yards per game and 4.8 yards per carry on the season. That was a team that 2 weeks after losing to Notre Dame went and ran for 310 yards against Florida, ran for 236 against Missouri, 242 against LSU, 209 against New Mexico State. And Notre Dame did a pretty good job keeping them in check, especially early in that game. So for the most part, I think this has been a good rush defense. The reason the numbers look the way that they look, and I'll pull those back up again, the reason they look like that, as we've said before, Notre Dame played two triple option teams in Navy and Army, and they held them. I think the number, what did the number we said, Trev? I think it was like 160 yards below their season average combined. The two of them combined below their season average, yet that they averaged over 200 yards a game against you. And I think actually might have been a little bit more than that. Let's go to rushing offense. So Army on the season averaged, well, they were down because they didn't run the ball very well against Army. So they went for 290, basically 299, and Notre Dame held them to 207. So they held them 92 yards below their average. Navy averaged 249 on the season, and Notre Dame held them to 222 yards. So that's 27 yards. So it ended up being 119 combined yards below their season average, but that's partly because Army's rush offense didn't perform that great against Navy. They went for 113 yards against Navy. That dragged their number way down. And then Navy went for 271 against Army. So that put theirs up a little bit. So, but it was like, I think 100 still, that's 119 yards below their season average. And that's going to raise your overall rushing average way more. That's why when we talked about this a few weeks ago, or a couple weeks ago, when we were talking about evaluating the Notre Dame rush defense, we said, this is why we said, look at their numbers against Power 5 only teams. And their rush defense against Power 5 only teams, Notre Dame is 19th. They were 20th when we broke it down last week, but there's been some bowl games and some, a couple bowl games since then. So Memphis, for example, fell below Notre Dame. I think they were ahead of Notre Dame last week, but they played West Virginia the other night, and West Virginia went for 206. So they fell behind them, but they were 20th. Now they're 19th in rushing defense. And when the opponent is a Power 5 only team, and Notre Dame ranks 21st in yards allowed per rush, which is, again, a pretty good number, especially when you consider that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of those teams that are ahead of them played one 3 or fewer games against Power 5 opponents. So when you play like Northern Illinois played 1, Texas State played 1, Toledo played 1, Boise State played 3. So that's kind of a look at it. So they were a much better team against traditional offenses this season when it comes to the run game. And that's going to have to continue here against Indiana. No doubt about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's you brought it up, and it's just weird to look into context when you factor in 2 triple option teams, right? Because like in those games, you kind of pay attention to more total yard output than you do like just rushing yards when, you have a team like Army that runs the ball 58 times in a game and passes for 4 times, So no, I mean, look, you brought it up, I think it was the Saturday show where we previewed like the IB Countdown to Kickoff show where you brought up Notre Dame's numbers against Power 5 opponents. And it kind of put a lot of those numbers into context. I think yards per game, didn't they go from like 51st to 20th? So
talking about the Notre Dame rush defense, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So 51st here in this breakdown, and they were 20th when we did it before the bowl started. So because obviously, as I mentioned, Memphis fell behind them. So they're 19th now because Memphis fell behind them after their bowl game. But yeah, I mean, it just all feeds into sometimes the stats don't tell all. That's why it's important to look at things with context. And like I said at the start of the show, when Notre Dame commits the resources to the run, when they play traditional offenses, I mean, most of the time they do a pretty solid job. Like a lot of the issues that they had at the start of the year, like allowing running backs and offensive line to kind of go and get a push so that, running backs are getting an extra 3 to 4 yards per carry. That hasn't really happened much. Their open field tackling has gotten significantly better. The interior of the defensive line is playing significantly better than they were in the month of September. So all of those things are pointing in the right direction. Now, you could also make the argument that Notre Dame hasn't faced a lot of teams in a traditional rushing offense that have like that 2-headed monster like Justice Ellison and Tyson Lawton either. So not since Louisville.
Yep.
Right. Because Woody Marks got hurt early in that game, that would have been one. Mm-hmm. USC would have had one. But I mean, I think you'd have to go like Georgia Tech has one stud running back, in my opinion, in Jamal Haynes. Army, Navy are just different animals. Florida State, no, their offensive line's so bad it doesn't matter. They have decent running backs. You have to go all the way back to Louisville, where they had 3 guys that they used a lot in that game. Where you're gonna and 2 of their 3 guys are young guys. Yeah, so it's like these are veterans, these are older guys, and so that's. You're correct. The only thing that I'll say that the reason I think you're going to agree, the reason I'm not as concerned about the two backs, it's you're not going to wear them down because there's 2 of them, but they're they're like almost identical runners. So it's not like Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price run very differently. They have different strengths and weaknesses. These 2 kids are basically the same back with how they go at you, which allows them to have some consistency as a run game, but as a defense, it also doesn't mean you've got to necessarily defend it differently when one of them is in the game compared to the other. Yeah, I agree with that absolutely. And the other thing that I think that is a little bit interesting that I wanted to bring up, Louisville and USC had 2 quarterbacks that could pull it and hurt you on the backside. Indiana does not, which I think is a little bit different of an aspect coming to this game. Jaden Maeva, I mean, we saw his ability as an athletic runner. Right, Tyler Shuck's not a burner. Like he's not gonna hurt you in the same way that Riley Leonard can. Albeit he's not a runner, but he's mobile.
Yes, yes, he's athletic enough to. I mean, he fumbled at the end of the play, but he still ripped off a 40-yard run. Now, Trev,
I think you might have been able to at least go for 20 or 30 on that one. Like the
30 mark
wide
generous.
Open. That was wide open.
30's generous. Open. I'll take 20. 30's generous. Yeah. Yeah. But that is another thing that you kind of have to factor in here is Indiana. There's no threat of Rourke keeping it around the backside, and if he does, he's not picking up the yards that Maeva could. He's not picking up the yards that Shuck could have. So, I think that's going to be another factor that I think needs to be considered when we talk about shutting down these 2 running backs. Well, not shutting down, but holding them at bay, right? And I like the point that you brought up about. Stylistically, they're very, very similar runners. I mean, the thing that helps Notre Dame is Jeremiah Love runs differently than Jadarian Price, and they both run differently than Riley Leonard and vice versa. And they all run differently from Aeneas Williams. So they can hurt you in many different ways, whereas Lawton comes in for Ellison, you're essentially stopping a very similar running back stylistically. So, yeah, I agree.
So, Trev, that's going to do it for the breakdown of the run game. Folks, before we head over to the pass game, you know what to do. Hit that little like button down below. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Give us a 5-star review. And as always, make sure you sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. If you are a member and you want to gift one for somebody else that you think would love our membership, shoot me an email, brian@irishbreakdown.com, and I can tell you how to get that done. And we'll get into the pass game next. So, Trev, this is the truly good on good matchup in this game. This is the one. Notre Dame comes into this game, as you see here in the statistics, third in the country in fewest pass yards allowed, second in passing yards allowed per attempt, number one pass completion against defense in the country, third in fewest touchdowns allowed, fourth in most interceptions, number one pass efficiency defense in the country. They don't allow a lot of big plays, only 10 plays of 30 yards or more all season, which ranks 17th. Against an Indiana team that ranks 29th in the nation in passing yards. Part of that because they've had some fourth quarter games. They've not thrown the ball a whole lot. And number 3 in yards per attempt, number 9 in yards per completion, number 8 in completion percentage, 5th in most touchdowns, 5th in fewest interceptions. And as I said before, Notre Dame has the number 1 pass efficiency defense. Indiana has the number 1 pass efficiency offense. Notre Dame ranks 17th in fewest plays of 30 yards or more allowed. Indiana ranks 24th in most plays of 30 yards or more with 21. Notre Dame ranks 30th or 37th in the country in sacks per game. Indiana ranks 41st in the country in sacks allowed. Very, very, very similar statistical football teams. And this is kind of what they do best. The run game at Indiana is solid. We just broke it down, but it is a complement to this part of the game. Notre Dame's run defense is solid, but they're an elite pass defense, and they have been for really the last 2.5 years, really. And and even at times in 2022, I mean, they did a great job shutting Ohio State down in 2022 with C.J. Stroud, right? They faced Drake May, shut him down. He got all his yards in the fourth quarter when they were pulling starters, and the game was like 45-17. They did a great job against Jaron Hall for BYU that year. They did a great job against Caleb Williams last year. They have gone against big-time quarterback, big-time quarterback, big-time quarterback, big-time receiver. We saw them against Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka last year. They held Marvin Harrison to less than 100 yards in his 2 games against Notre Dame combined, less than 100 yards. They've been a big-time pass defense. They're coming off of a game where they really struggled to stop the pass. Indiana has one of the best pass offenses in the country. They are coming off a game 2 games before the end of the season, so not their last game, but the game before, where their pass game got completely shut down. And that's that. So are those anomaly games, or were those units exposed? I think they're anomaly games for both. I think this is going to be a great matchup.
Yeah, this is the moneymaker matchup, man. I mean, you go through and you break down, you have the number 1 pass efficiency defense going up against the number 1 pass efficiency offense. You have a team in a secondary like Notre Dame's that forced the 4th most interceptions in all of college football. You have a team like Indiana who's thrown the 5th least amount of interceptions in all of college football, right? I mean, this is going to be a really, really, really fun matchup to watch. And this is the one that gets highlighted by the national media. And this is the one that a lot of fans kind of take to, rightfully so, right? I mean, Indiana's offense, their run game, I think they get glossed over. And I don't think that they get enough credit that their 2 top backs have 22 rushing touchdowns on the season, right? And same thing with Notre Dame's defense. I think they get a lot of hate, and people aren't willing to take a deep dive into the numbers of where they're at truly. But there's no hiding these statistics. Right there is, you can just watch these 2 teams play games and know that teams just don't move the ball well through the air against Notre Dame. And you know that when Indiana's rolling, they are moving the ball through the air. You look at completion percentage allowed by Notre Dame, only team in the country that is allowed under 50%. I think the next closest, what'd you say, Brian, was 52%, 54%, somewhere in there, which is just, that's crazy. You have a very efficient team in Indiana, 8th overall in the country in completion percentage. They don't turn the ball over. They're 5th in the country in passing touchdowns. Then you look on the opposite side. Notre Dame, best defense, passing defense in the country in completion percentage. They turn the ball over. They don't allow passing touchdowns. This is going to be, what what breaks first, the unstoppable force or the immovable object, that type of conversation. So, yeah, this is going to be a fun one to break down, man.
So let's get into the breakdown, Trev. And you guys see the statistical numbers there. Let's talk a little bit about the Indiana pass game, and we'll talk about the matchup against the Notre Dame pass defense. Number one, for the most part this season, they've been pretty good in pass protection. And that's been something that when their offense is rolling, they protect the quarterback very well. That's going to be a big part of this matchup. But let's get into what they do schematically. Number one, they do a lot of things out of a lot of different formations. They're not a super complex pass game, Trev. I mean, when you break them down, they're not running these like super like Lincoln Riley trying to show everyone how smart I am type of pass game. They have some stuff they do well, but the whole mantra of what Indiana does in a lot of in offense and defense, but especially offense, is we're not going to run a ton of volume, but what we're going to do is we're going to do some things that put the defense in really tough binds, whether that's with alignments, whether that's with movement, personnel groupings, post-snap switches, using motions in certain ways to really influence you. But our kids are going to know how to play the game at a very high level. Our receivers are going to be great route runners. Our receivers are going to know how to win off the line. They're going to know how to win on their top ends. They're going to know how to use their stems to manipulate secondary players. They attack the football effectively. Our quarterback throws within rhythm. He makes smart decisions. He throws with good timing. They pass pro. Their running backs can pass pro. They have checkdowns built in throughout their pass game. If their quarterback gets in trouble, they'll take the slides. They'll take the checkdowns. And they know when to call stuff. Like, that's a part of this that I really like is Shanahan is a really good at, like, for one example, they're a great screen team, in my opinion. I've broken down about 4 or 5 Indiana games, and their screen game is really effective. And it's not just the modern day RPO screens, the nows, the bubbles. They'll run that stuff. I mean, I think it was it Michigan or was it Maryland? I forget which game, but they busted just a bubble screen for like 25 yards early in the game off of an RPO. Just flat defender squeezed down. They sealed the corner, hit that bubble. The guy got outside, 25-yard gain. It's a leverage thing. It's not super complicated. But the receiver did a great job blocking. The guy that caught the ball knew how to attack the perimeter, attacked it, saw that they had the guy sealed, just kept going right up the sideline. It's not, I mean, Ryan, Trev, I was running like kind of RPO type bubble screens back in early 2000s. This is not a new concept, right? And I got it from watching Rich Rod at Clemson. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't new stuff. It's just they run it really effectively. And they that's what makes RPO so effective is they tag stuff to where if you're doing something to take away the run game, they can pull it and get the ball outside. But it's not so much that their screen game is super well designed. They run a bunch of slip screens. Again, not new. They've been running slip screens since the 1980s that I remember. And I only say 1980s because that's when I started watching football. I'm sure it wasn't invented in the 1980s. It's not that they run slip screens. It's so challenging. It's they are great at calling it. It seems like they know exactly when to call it, whether it's against off coverage, whether it's against blitz. They're great at calling it. And that's such an important part of being a good play caller is not, I have a bunch of cool plays. It's, do you know when to call them and what's the moment? Do you have the other team's tendencies down pat? Do you know, hey, this is the down and distance where we can feel pretty comfortable. We're going to get some sort of weak side blitz, and then you just run a little slip screen right behind it. If you run a slip screen and they're not blitzing into the boundary against that, they're going to eat it up. And they're great at calling it. And that's where I give them a lot of credit. It's not that they're, and I just so people know, I mean this is a compliment. I can't stand coaches that run a million different plays and their players don't run any of them well, right? Because you're just trying to out-scheme people. Hey, whatever we do, we're going to do it at a high level. And I think that's what makes this game this pass game so effective. It's that stuff right there, Trev. But I mean, we're going to see RPOs. We're going to see quick game. They're going to run some levels. They really do a nice job of clear outs, right? So if you overplay, they'll run like smash to the boundary. And if you overplay that, the safety takes the corner route. They're going to bring some levels back across, right? They're just going to bring an over route to replace that safety that bites. And if your linebacker runs with that, then they've got a deep dig coming behind it that they're just going to turn around and bang that. Notre Dame runs some of that stuff. It's not super complicated, but it's coached well. It's taught well. And Curtis Rourke knows where to go with the football. They're going to run some corner stuff. They'll run smash to get a corner route. They did a really nice post with a corner against Michigan. They actually ran an angle corner against Michigan where it looked like he was going to kind of come down and he busts out. to the post route, took the safety out, and Rourke just throws it right over top of the flat defender for a big play early in that game against Michigan. So they do some interesting stuff, but it's not reinventing the wheel. What I like about their pass game too, Trevor, is they're not afraid to attack the middle of the field. They're going to hit a lot of in cuts, a lot of dig cuts, big seam routes. He threw a great backside shoulder to a tight end off of I think it was a 4x1 empty look. No, yeah, it was a 4x1 empty look where they motioned the back out. Pardon me. And they ran like a little pump fake and then ran the tight end right up the seam on like a little delay. He just throws it back shoulder because the safety was coming over, gets him first to goal at the 1 yard line. Like, they are not afraid to attack you in the middle of the field. And then, of course, you've got to worry about just the outside go balls. They do a great job just throwing the boundary. If they get cover one and they don't think that safety is going to help, they have no problem just dropping back and throwing a go ball. And you and I were talking about this before the show, Trev. Curtis Rourke is one of the best back shoulder go ball throwers in the country from what I've seen on film. His ball placement on back shoulder throws on the boundary go balls is outstanding.
Yeah, he is a fantastic rhythm thrower, and I mean that's a back shoulder. He has really good ball placement there. He's not somebody that's going to like rip you apart with his arm strength. I think the comp that I made to you before the show started is like he's like a Tommy Rees-esque type of quarterback. I mean, he can get the ball where it needs to go. It's very rhythm based. Yeah, he makes really, really good decisions with the football, and that's what you would expect out of a 6-year senior. And that's what he's lived up to, right? I don't mean that as a detriment to him. From a play calling standpoint, they have really good situational awareness. To your point, like it just feels like they know the right time to call a screen. You know what I mean? It just feels like they know the right time to call certain plays. And I believe that since their playbook isn't super dense and doesn't look like a phone book, they've gotten to be able to refine what they do. It's almost like second nature to them. You can tell. You can tell that when Curtis Rourke is in a rhythm, he's doing things that he is just the most comfortable with, and the things that he's ran 1,000 times, whether it be at Ohio, whether it be at the offseason in Indiana, and so they do a really, really good job of that. They're a very efficient passing game. They don't turn the football over. I almost said they don't take a lot of risks. Like the amount of deep balls and go balls they throw into the boundary, like that's, a little bit more than just running dump offs and screens and hitting flat routes. But
no, you're right though, Trev. That's not a risk.
Yeah.
The way he throws the back shoulder throw, it's not a risk.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be a super high efficiency play where it's like you're completing 90%, like you're completing like boundary hitches versus off coverage, right? But It's for them, that's not a high risk play. I have seen him throw very few go balls, the back shoulder go balls that the defense had any chance at intercepting. Maybe you make him force to throw it out of bounds or you break it up or whatever, but the way they throw the back shoulder go ball, he does not throw that unless he knows he has a one-on-one. Very rarely.
Mm-hmm.
Very rarely. And in a couple of the games, he did take some chances. Like Maryland, he was very aggressive, and I thought throwing off. Well, we'll get to that here in a little bit. But you are correct. They don't take a lot of chances, and that's what I like about it because but that doesn't mean that they're just, to your point, they're not just throwing checkdowns all game.
Right.
They're throwing over the middle of the field. They're taking their shots up the seam. They're throwing the backside digs, but those aren't risky throws. Those are, I'm going back to that because I saw the defense overload the front side and I'm coming back to that dig throw. Those are the kind of things. So I think your instinct to say that was correct. They don't take a lot of chances. And the deep shots they do take, by and large, aren't risky throws. They're smart deep shots.
Yeah, no, so like that's what I was like trying to come around to. I appreciate the help there because I didn't know how to like word it, because like it's like on paper you think throwing over the middle of the field is like risky and throwing seams are risky, but like it's not the way that they do it. It's not in the way that they execute it either. So it's a very efficient passing game, man. I can't stress it enough. They take care of the football. They don't put themselves in a lot of opportunities for the defense to cause turnovers. Now, Notre Dame has had a history of playing those teams and have had success, but you probably do have to go back to Louisville once again when they face this level of as talented of a passer. Maeva showed me some stuff, I will say, against USC that I didn't know that he had. He threw some good balls that game, but on a consistent level, I think you kind of have to go back to Tyler Shuck at Louisville. So Yeah, the secondary is going to have their hands full, man. You combine that with really good, experienced wide receivers. Like, they don't really have that over-the-top explosive guy. I think Omar Cooper is that guy for them, not necessarily Elijah Surratt. I think Elijah Surratt's kind of their all reliable.
He's their. Yes, I think that's a great. You and I, we were talking about this before the show. Elijah Surratt is their best receiver in that he's their most reliable. He's a possession guy. He can hit some big plays as well, but their most dangerous receiver, in my opinion, is Omar Cooper Jr.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one you got to worry about him a little bit guy. And like Surratt beat Michigan for a touchdown, but it was on a double move. It was a stop and go. When you watch Omar Cooper beat a cornerback from Maryland for a big touchdown, 27, he just beat the guy. He just ran by the guy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a different type of gear there with those two guys.
Oh, yeah.
And so they're both dangerous, but they're dangerous in very different ways. And that's what I think makes this pass offense so effective, because you made a great comment. What was it you said? You said you're talking about Miles Cross, Miles Price, and Keyshawn Williams. Said they're just a bunch of Jordan Faisons.
Yeah.
Right? And they are. But then they also combine that with Elijah Surratt, who's a 6'2", 6'3", bigger, thicker kid, can catch over the middle, can win. He's got great body control on some of those back shoulder throws. You talk about not being risky. One of the back shoulders I saw them hit when I was breaking down film was a back shoulder to Elijah Surratt where they threw it from their own 1 yard line. But it was a one-on-one. It was either he was going to catch it or nobody was going to catch it. You know what I mean? So it's not really a risky play from a turnover standpoint. And but he had great body control, made a great catch, and he throws that route really well. And then, of course, there's Omar Cooper, who's different than all of them because he's a 6'1", vertically oriented, faster guy that can beat you over the top. And then, of course, there's Zach Horton, who's a big, thick, 6'4", 240-pound, work the middle of the field, possession type of tight end who can hurt you up the seam. And so, to your point, Trev, like they have a lot of different types of receivers that can hurt you, where it's not a bunch of cookie. Like their slots are kind of the same guy. Doesn't matter who they put in there, right?
Yeah.
But then they bring in Omar Cooper, and he's a completely different player than Miles Cross. And then you have Garrett Surratt on the back. Elijah Surratt on the backside, and then all of a sudden he's a different type of guy. And I think that's what another thing that makes them a scary, football team. They also do, Trev. You pointed this out when we were talking before the show. They do a lot of post snap switching also, which creates problems for teams who aren't disciplined. And I think against a team that runs as much man as Notre Dame does, we're going to see a lot of stack, a lot of motion to stack, a lot of bunch, I think they're going to probably run even more levels than we've seen them run this year in an attempt to take advantage of Notre Dame's man concepts. I think we're going to see a lot of that post-snap switch type stuff from this pass game in hopes of creating confusion with Notre Dame. We're going to see them go at Notre Dame's linebackers with their running backs in the pass game, in my opinion. And that's going to put, Notre Dame's going to have to step up and play well in those type of instances.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Indiana's offensive coordinators have done a really good job this year of thriving against matchups, right? Because they don't have a stable of guys short of maybe Omar Cooper that can just go blow by people, right? Like they don't have Emeka Egbuka. They don't have Jeremiah Smith. Now, mind you, like not a whole lot of people.
And nobody does anybody else, right? But your point's valid. I mean, there's a lot of teams that have those type of guys that, they don't have an Eric Singleton from Georgia Tech. They don't have a Malachi Fields, who's a 6'4", 220 guy that can run by you. They don't have, some of the guys that USC had. They don't have a Will Fuller. I mean, there's a lot of teams that you don't have to be Jeremiah Smith to have a vertical,
right?
Take the top off type of player. They don't have. You're correct. They don't have that outside of one guy, right?
Yep. And so what their offensive coaching staff has done a really, really good job of is putting their players in a position to win, putting them in favorable matchups. That's why they use so much motion that they do. That's why they do a lot of those post-snap switches, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to set their players up to maximize like the most amount of success that they can have, right? Like this is like when I go through and I look at this offense, like they will pick you apart. Like it's not, to your point, Brian, there's a lot of people that think that this is just some air it out offense, and every single time that they score passing touchdowns, it's over the top of the defense and they're going for 40 yards plus. This is an offensive passing attack that will pick you apart. They will get their 15-yard gains, their 21-yard gains, their 11-yard gains, their 15-yard gains, and that's what it looks like when they're humming. because Rourke is hitting the back shoulder. He's dumping off a screen. An RPO screen goes for 12 yards. They're hitting levels across the middle. They're hitting their tight end up the seam. So it's a passing attack that can hurt you in many different ways because they have different types of receivers. They don't just all have that one same guy. So, yeah, their passing attack is lethal, man. It's real.
And that gets us to our last part, Trevor. Biggest part of this game, obviously discipline in your coverage, being smart, good scheme, tackling in space. At the end of the day, the biggest part of this, and if you really want to know why Ohio State completely dominated Indiana's pass game, their coverage was good in that game. But it came down to this. Curtis Rourke never had time to consistently throw the football. That right there, Trev, is going to be a huge, huge part of this game. Can Notre Dame beat Indiana up front? And can they beat Indiana with 4 and 5 man pressures and not have to heat him up with, 6 and 7 guys in order to get to him? That's going to be a huge, huge part of this game, Trev.
Yeah, I mean, the pass rush is going to be massive. I've talked about it a lot, and there's a direct correlation between the amount of pressures that Curtis Rourke sees and the amount of times that he's turned the football over. I mean, he has, 5 interceptions on the season, I believe, and 2 came against Maryland and 1 came against Ohio State. Mm-hmm. And the correlation there is he was sacked, I think, twice against Michigan, 3 times against Maryland. The offense wasn't able to get going, and he finished the game 8 of 18 for 68 yards because he got sacked 5 times against Ohio State. And they weren't, to your point, the coverage was good. He was reaching the top of his drop and had minimum 2 guys in his face.
Yep.
So and I'm not expecting Notre Dame to have the same type of pass rush that Ohio State did because it's just different personnel. But Notre Dame is going to have to find a really good way of dialing up pressure without sacrificing taking people out of coverage. I agree with that 100%.
Well, you look at the Maryland game as an example. This was going to bring up earlier, Trevor, is you look at he threw 2 picks in that game early. Mm-hmm. He throws 2 picks early against Notre Dame. This game could get ugly. Mm-hmm. He threw 2 picks early in that game, and one of them was he just rushed a ball over the middle because he had a guy coming right in his face. And he didn't see that the DB was basically baiting him on an in cut and stepped right in front of it. He had another one where he throws a post route, and he doesn't see the safety kind of playing over. They had a safety kind of backside, and he rolled to the middle, and he didn't see it because he didn't have time to see it because he threw a post route a little bit blind because he had a guy coming up the middle. He threw it off his back foot. Mm-hmm. He doesn't do that a lot, but when you partly because a lot of teams just couldn't pressure him the way that Maryland could early and the way that Michigan did in the middle of the game and the way that Ohio State did. And so those are opportunities for you to say, hey, listen, it's not just about sacking the quarterback. Sacks are great, but and Ohio State did a great job of that. I mean, he was getting to the top of his drops and he was basically curling up in a fetal position because they were getting to him so quickly. I mean, it was wild. And Cody Simon did it on pressures. I think it was JT had a huge sack off the edge where he stripped him from behind, or was it Jack Sawyer? Which one? Was it JT that did that?
I think Sawyer had the strip sack, but JT also had a sack in that game.
Yeah, so JT, Sawyer had the strip sack, you said, right? Mm-hmm. So that was early in the game. Second quarter, comes up right behind him, knocks the ball out, and they recover it. Yep. And he was just harassed from start to finish. I mean, that was a big part of that game. And Notre Dame's going to have some level similar success, and it's not just about sacks. I mean, you think to the Notre Dame game against USC. Jack Kaiser didn't hit Jaden Maeva on that pick 6 to Xavier Watts. He didn't hit him. But he got into the backfield so quickly that he had to rush the throw and threw blind and didn't see Xavier Watts pedaling right into the end zone and step in front of the ball and pick it off, right? Those are things we've seen. We saw teams early in the year. They would just they'd see the pressure coming. I'm going to quickly throw this slant, and then Christian Gray almost steps right in front of it and almost takes it back to the house. Because they're panicking. I got to get rid of the ball quick. I got to get rid of the ball quick. Get rid of the ball quick. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then they get in their pressure. I mean, that's what happened against Virginia. That kid was not seeing the safeties coming over to robbing into the alleys because he couldn't get back to them in time. He had his first read, and the ball's got to come out now because I don't have time to get to my next read. And so sometimes you're seeing teams throw blind. That's why Notre Dame makes so many picks. That's why their 2 starting safeties have the number of picks that they have this season. Is because of that right there, Trev, is they are a team that when their pressure package is working, they force quarterbacks to throw the ball very quickly, and they can't read through the defense, which is, as I said, why the two safeties for Notre Dame have combined for 8 interceptions this season and 2 pick sixes. It's why Notre Dame has 6 pick sixes on the season for the most part, because the Boubacar pick, he was, Riley Mills is pressuring him. He's scrambling around. Mills comes out, knocks the ball out right into Boubacar's hands, and Boubacar takes it back to the house. They weren't pick sixes necessarily where you were throwing and the guy just made a play and you ran it back, or you missed a throw like DJ did against Benjamin Morrison 2 years ago. He just made a bad ball. Benjamin paid it perfectly, picked it off, ran it back. These are pressure picks and pressure pick sixes, where pressure led that guy kind of throw him blind and you're able to step in front of it and house it. That's going to be a huge part of this, because if he's sitting there in the pocket clean for most of this game, Trevor, as you said earlier, he will find openings in this defense if he has time. He will.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, man, Curtis Rourke has shown the ability against quality opponents to dice him up if he has the time. Now, unfortunately, and this is not meaning to badmouth anybody, like this is just an evaluation of his game, what he has in experience and what he has in his decision-making, he kind of lacks in overall arm strength. That's why he's such a rhythm-based timing quarterback. It's one of the reasons why he had trouble against Maryland and against Michigan and against Ohio State. If you throw off his timing, he doesn't have the arm strength to make up for it, right? So, but I mean, for people that need a little bit more context, I mean, like if you're reaching the top of your drop and your progression is sped up, he has a good enough understanding of where the ball should go, but timing is everything with him, right? Because he doesn't have the Everett Golson arm strength. You know what I'm saying? Like he doesn't have that to make up for it. He was a little late on this read, but he makes up for it because he can rip it in there like nobody's business. So getting pressure on him, like not just with sacks, to your point, and I could not agree with that more. People equate pressure with sacks, which
sometimes it is, right?
Sure, absolutely, that is a factor of it, But then you go through and you look at hurries, you look at hits on the quarterback, and a quarterback like Curtis Rourke, like those take a toll on him because he's not athletic enough to escape the pocket. He's not athletic enough to go and break sacks in the backfield. Once you get him wrapped up, most of the time he's going down.
Trev, Maryland, and that's partly what hurt Maryland. They missed a lot of sack opportunities in that game where they either ran by him or just whiffed on him. Not necessarily whiffed on him because he made anybody miss, but they just lost gap discipline. And he would just kind of step in and just kind of he moved the chains a couple times, but those were mistakes by Maryland that Notre Dame has had a tendency not to make those same mistakes, except against more athletic quarterbacks.
Right.
And to your point, like he's not a guy that's going to be doing what Jaden Maeva did to Josh Burnham in space and make him miss on a sack. He's going to go down.
Right.
And that's a great point on that one for sure. And to Trev, it's not so much like somebody in the chat said, Al Golden's not going to allow him to sit back in the pocket. Well, schematically, sure, but it's got to work, right? I mean, I don't think Al Golden intended for Northern Illinois to do the things against them that they did either. I don't think he intended for Jaden Maeva to beat them the way that he did either. You still have to go out there and execute. And that's why I say is like he's not going to just sit there and drop 7 or 8 all game and rush 3 on first, second, and third down. But when you bring those pressures, they got to hit home. And that's going to be the key. And that's going to require some guys up front to win. You've got to win. That's where I think the impact of Mills and Cross could have the biggest impact, to be redundant in that sentence, is when those two guys are both going, it's almost impossible if you're a quarterback to get comfortable. It's almost impossible because one of those two is winning most snaps.
Because, right. I agree 100%. It's because they're two very different interior pass rushers.
Right.
You have Riley Mills, the big 6'5", 300-pounder, and then you have Howard Cross. He's 6'1", he's 288. He's very athletic. He has very quick hands. And not that Riley Mills doesn't, but Mills feasts on guys not physically being able to hold him at the line of scrimmage. Mm-hmm. Howard Cross can make people miss. He's very quick. He's very twitchy. And so when both of them are humming
and if Donovan Heinisch can play in this game the way he has since when Howard Cross got hurt, Yeah. And that's the thing is it's just capitalized. And that's the thing that killed Notre Dame against USC, Trevor, is just they didn't capitalize on plays that were there. I mean, you think of Riley Mills missed a sack. Josh Burnham missed a sack. I think Bryce Young missed a sack. There was a play, the long 20-yard run that Quentin Joyner had to set up one of their touchdowns. Gabriel Rubio's sitting there right here. I mean, squares the kid up in the hole. They hit each other in the hole, and then Gabriel just doesn't finish them off. It wasn't a great play by Quentin Joyner. It was a bad play by Gabriel Rubio, and the guy goes off. Like, you can't miss those opportunities against this offense. If you can take advantage, if they took advantage of those opportunities against USC, that game's not close. That game's not close. If you take advantage of those opportunities against Indiana, this game will not be overly close. Or at least it'll be, if it is close, it'll be a lower scoring close game because their defense is shutting Notre Dame down as well. And that's the thing. Because if this becomes a who's got better players, Notre Dame's going to dominate this matchup. And I think even most Indiana fans will admit that. But what makes this team so good is they have a way of neutralizing their not having elite talent. They have better talent than I think some Notre Dame fans are giving them credit for. But they're not an elite receiving core, to your point. There's not any future first-round draft picks in this receiving core. I don't think there's any second or third-round draft picks in this receiving core, maybe third. Neither of these running backs are going to be high draft picks. None of these offensive linemen are high draft picks. Curtis Rourke's not going to be a high draft pick. But they work so well together that if you make mistakes, they will make you pay because they're a smart football team. They're a well-coached football team. They're a confident football team. They're a tough football team. And I think that's what makes this team so good. If it's just about who's got better players, Notre Dame's going to win. Yeah. It's going to have to be about who executes what they do better. Ohio State didn't just out-talent Indiana. They also out-executed Indiana.
Yeah.
And that's the key.
Yeah.
And so if Cody Simon's hitting the wrong gaps on his stunts or he's late on his twists or, they're taking bad, angles on the edge, if JT's going too wide on his edge rush or if Jack Sawyer goes too wide on his edge rush and the tackle can just ride him out, then yeah, it was a great call, but you didn't execute that call effectively. And that's why they made plays. And that's going to ultimately what this game is going to come down to for Notre Dame is defensively is, do you play at a high level of execution and intelligence? And if you do, this will be a win for Notre Dame because they have the better players. But so didn't they had better players in Northern Illinois. That's just the reality of it, right? I mean, Alabama had better players than Vanderbilt. Alabama had better players than Tennessee. Alabama had better players than Oklahoma. Georgia had better players than Ole Miss, in my opinion. Now, Georgia has better players than Georgia Tech, and if it wasn't for the officiating crew helping them out, that's another loss by the Bulldogs, right? I mean, Ohio State has better players than Michigan. We could go down this line and do this all year. All these teams losing to teams that they had better players than that team. Texas has better players in certain spots in Georgia that they didn't win those matchups, right? I mean, that's what football is, Trevor, is yes, you may have better players, but this isn't like basketball where if you have like that one great player, it doesn't really matter what you're going to do. This is a different type of animal, man. And you've got to play, you've got to execute at a very high level. And we've seen a lot of teams this year that had better players than teams that beat them. A lot of teams that lost games to teams that had better. I mean, we watched Florida State lose a bunch of games to teams that didn't have better players. And that's what I'm saying. This is, and we saw a team like LSU lose to teams that they had better players than that team. You got to execute your game plan. You got to play hard. You got to play physical. And you're going to have to beat Indiana. They're not going to beat themselves. Well, Indiana threw 3 picks. They beat themselves. No, if Indiana throws 3 picks, it won't because they beat themselves. It'll be because Notre Dame was dominating up front and he was rushing his throws and having to get the ball out, and they forced him into mistakes. He won't make a ton of unforced errors. You have to force him into mistakes. And if you do, you'll have a shot to advance. And that's really what's the key is for this Notre Dame defense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it comes down to them being able to execute at a high level because Indiana is a team that can make, like a team as a whole on offense and defense, but we're talking about their offense today. They capitalize on other people's mistakes. Mm-hmm. And they do such a good job of it because they execute at such a high level. They take care of the football at such a high level. They're efficient. They're a very efficient team. They have so much experience, man.
Well, this is we'll wrap it up with this, Trevor, this is a big part of that too, right? Situational football. Man. Indiana's not just a team ripping off a bunch of 60-yard plays, and they are a great situational football team. Does not surprise you that a team that scores like they do is third in the country in red zone offense and number 1 in the country in red zone touchdown offense, right? It should not surprise you that a team that's well coached is number 12 in the country in third down offense. it should not surprise you that the team that does not beat itself ranks number 3 with fewest turnovers in a game, right? None of those things, if you've watched this Indiana football team, none of these numbers will surprise you because you've watched them do it and you see how smart they are as a football team. And that's the thing is, and now what's helped Notre Dame is outside of a couple games, they've also been a great situational team. Their red zone touchdown defense has faltered a little bit down the stretch, if we're being honest. Some of that has to do with teams getting garbage touchdowns. Virginia got 2 red zone touchdowns against their backup defense, right? Georgia Tech got a red zone touchdown against their backup defense. So, but still, it doesn't go from 49-9 if you take out the garbage touchdowns. It's still outside the top 25.
Right.
But great third down defense. Number 1 in the country in turnovers gained. Notre Dame limits big plays on the season. And that's a big reason why, Notre Dame holds teams out of the end zone pretty decent amount. You know what I mean? So, they force more field goals, force turnovers, red zone. I mean, you think of that early in that game when I think it was the Notre Dame special teams gave Miami, Ohio a very short field.
Mm-hmm.
They get inside the 10-yard line. What happens? Christian Gray jumps a slant route. Ball goes up in the air. Junior Talamaka is zone dropping. He sees it, runs over, dives, and makes the catch. Boom, turnover. You got the ball, crisis averted.
Mm-hmm.
They've done a lot of things like that this year, and that's what makes them good. But that's what Indiana does well, right? Indiana's problem against Ohio State wasn't that they couldn't do this. It's that they couldn't get the ball in the red zone,
right?
Because they were dominated up front. So that's the final piece of this too, Trevor. Situational football in a playoff game like this between 2 great teams. Who's better on third down? Who can stay on the field or who can get off the field? Who wins the turnover battle? Who turns red zone drives into touchdowns, and which offense is held out of the end zone? Those are the differences in games like this, Trevor. And that's where Notre Dame is going to have to be at their best against Indiana, because Indiana hasn't faced a whole lot. They've really only faced one defense that can come even close to Notre Dame in these categories, and that's Ohio State. And we saw it happen in that game.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Look, guys, I cannot say it enough. The battle in the red zone on both offense and defense for each team is going to be spectacular. I mean, you go and it's completely different narratives depending on what side of the ball you're talking about. Indiana hasn't been great in the red zone this year. Notre Dame's offense hasn't been great in the red zone this year. Which one's going to kind of give? Now, some of Notre Dame's offensive struggles have been due to field goal kicking. But I'm going to have an article kind of breaking down both sides of the football. But you go and you look at the defense, right? You have a Notre Dame defense that ranks, let me see where I put it. You have Notre Dame's red zone defense ranks number 5 in the country in trips allowed to the red zone. So not only can teams not move the ball on them, they just don't make it into the red zone that much. But then you go and you look at Indiana, and they rank number 2 in the country in trips to the red zone with 66. The only other team that's ranked ahead of them is UNLV. They rank number 4 in the country number 3 in the country against Power 4 opponents, where they have 47 trips to the red zone. You go through and you look at all of these. I think they're number 1 in the country in touchdowns. Indiana's offense is number 1 in the country in red zone touchdowns. They have 54 on the season. So it's just this is a battle of true
by a lot, Trev.
Yeah.
I mean, the number 2 team in the country has 46. Mm-hmm. That's Boise State, who's played 1 more game than Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
The next closest Power 5 team has 9 fewer red zone touchdowns than Indiana.
Yep. And this all feeds into what I was talking about, how this isn't for as explosive of an offense as people believe this to be. They are a more methodical offense than what I think people are giving them credit for. Like I said, they're picking up, 10-yard chunks, 15-yard chunks, 8-yard run, 12-yard screen, 22-yard back shoulder. They work their way into the red zone and they score touchdowns. I mean, This is the battle in the red zone to me inside of the 20-yard line for 60 minutes is going to be so much fun. This is going to be one where, I think I even say it in the article, get your popcorn ready for this one. This is going to be a fun one.
So, Trev, the final part of today's show, we are going to talk about game wreckers. And we've talked a lot about them already. People know why they're important. And I think in this matchup, it's going to be every bit as important, if not even more so than for Notre Dame than on the offensive side of the ball. because I think on this side of the ball, I do think the talent gap is a little bit more narrow in this matchup than when we talk about the Notre Dame offense against the Indiana defense. I think this is the side where Indiana has to, I mean, like, again, they don't have an elite receiving core, but Elijah Surratt can hurt you. Omar Cooper can hurt you. Keyshawn Williams can hurt you. Miles Cross can hurt you. Miles Price can hurt you. There's a closer talent gap, in my opinion, between the tackles for Indiana and the edge players for Notre Dame than there is on the other side of the ball when you look at the Notre Dame tackles against the Indiana edge players. I think there's a very similar talent edge there. You know what I mean? And I think Notre Dame has the better talent. Here it's like, okay, is RJ Open a better player right now than the tackles at Indiana? I think that's a little bit more debatable at this point in time, outside of, early Bryce Young and sometimes Josh Burnham against the run. So those are the things you look at, man. And you look at this matchup and you say, hey, listen, game record is going to be important. We talked a little bit about it earlier. Can the D tackle step up and make plays where, look, this is the kind of game where you're like, whew, boy, I'm glad they got that sack, because the safety at Notre Dame got beat on that post route, but he couldn't get the ball off because that's where games like this are where that matters. Yeah. Because, hey, boy, and we see that in teams that aren't able to make those plays and play that great football aren't going to be that way. So you're going to have your dudes. You said it earlier, Trev, your dudes are going to have to be dudes.
Dudes got to be dudes. Have to. And I mean, that's just in moments like this. And I said it yesterday, you need your big players to step up, like that's why they were voted a captain. That's why you know what I mean? So it's game records is going to be huge. And it will be if Notre Dame makes a playoff run. It will be if Indiana makes a playoff run. Right. So yeah, game records, man, let's get into it.
So first of all, we look at the other team. You can't let Elijah Surratt go off. You can't let Omar Cooper be a big play weapon. You can't let their running backs make a lot of yards after contact in the throwing game and the running game. You can't let their slot receivers have a lot of yards after contact in the throwing game and the screen game. It's the perimeter, especially the perimeter is really where it's at, but the perimeter and the backs, you can't let those guys, if they catch the ball at 5, they're getting 5. If they catch the ball at 7, they're getting 7. If you have your gap secured, then they're getting nothing in the run game. So guess what? Don't lose gaps. But when you get that play at the line of scrimmage, make it. And that's going to be a big part. So you can't let their pass catchers especially be game wreckers in this game. That's going to be a big key for the Notre Dame defense. So let's talk a little bit about the Notre Dame game wreckers, Trevor. And we'll give 2 guys each. We're going to start off on defense. And let you go. Whoa, we're not going to start off on defense. We're only going to talk about the defense. We're going to let you start off on the defensive conversation. Give me your first game record. And this is more what we're doing here. This is more kind of for fun. We're predicting it, who we think the game records are going to be. Obviously, if Trevor and I knew exactly what was going to happen, we would be working for fun, not for livelihood, because we would have made some bets and we would both be, multimillionaires. But this is looking at film, breaking down matchups, knowing what's important, but then also having a little bit of fun with it and predicting who we think are going to be game wreckers, why we think they're going to be game wreckers, and what we think the impact of that happening would be in this game. So I'll let you start off.
Yeah, so my first game wrecker, I have Howard Cross. And, you could tell that the Notre Dame pass rush in the USC game missed him. And, he took the time to come back and play healthy. When I look at this matchup specifically, Indiana's offensive line.
You were asking if my hat's black.
I saw.
It's not. It's navy blue.
I saw.
So, yeah.
Sorry, Ryan's trying to make a statement.
I did that, Trev. It's navy blue. Navy blue.
At first, I was like, if you don't want to look at me, I could just turn my camera off.
Well, it does. Right. Well, unfortunately, I can't. That doesn't really do much because I can still see your thing. So
true.
It's covering myself up. I apologize, Trevor. Please continue.
No, you were all right, my man. So Howard Cross is going to be my game record. Look, Indiana's offensive line struggles with more athletic defensive line. And when I go through and I look at this matchup, I think a guy like Riley Mills matches up relatively decent with what the Indiana offensive line likes to do. If it becomes a game of who's stronger, who's going to get pushed around, I think you could split hairs and call it even. Like I've watched plays this year where Riley Mills gets driven off the ball. I've also watched game this year where Riley Mills absolutely manhandles whatever interior offensive lineman he goes up against. So, those you can kind of be splitting hairs. But when I look at a guy like Howard Cross and when he's playing at his best, he is a much more agile defensive lineman than what Riley Mills is because of the size difference, right? Howard Cross is 6'1", 288. So, for him, I think in the pass rush especially, Notre Dame's defensive line has been playing at their best when their interior defensive line can get a pass rush. And I think if this game comes down to if the edge rushers can get a pass rush on Rourke, I'd be a lot more comfortable if 56 or 99 in the middle was also generating one as well, right? So first one for me is going to be Howard Cross.
Yeah, I think it's pick an interior lineman, Trevor, for me.
Mm-hmm.
Pick one. Pick a D tackle, any D tackle,
Right.
and hopefully more. And that's why for me, if I was going to talk about the D tackles, it'd be the unit. It's got to be the Riley Mills one play, Howard Cross the next, Donovan Heinrich the next. I mean, holy moly, guess who stepped up on that first down with a big sack? It was Gabriel Rubio. It's like it's the unit as a whole has to be dominant in this game.
Yeah,
that's where, and I'd say this. I mean, Xavier Watts is a stud, and the corners at times have been outstanding, and the linebacker. But when this defense is really rolling, these interior guys are dominant. That's a big one.
Yep, absolutely. I was going back and forth on if I wanted to do the D tackle room as a whole or pick one specific one, and I just went with a specific player. But I couldn't agree with you more. That entire room, especially in the interior, is going to have to step up. Did you want me to give my second one, or did you want to give your?
I was going to lead you into your second one, buddy. All right, D tackle's got to step up. Trevor, who's your other game wrecker?
My other game wrecker is going to be Christian Gray.
Okay, cool.
And he's going to be tested in the secondary, especially, for him, it's a little bit of a rebound game. There's a common theme going on with my two game wreckers, right? You have Howard Cross, who hasn't played football in a month, and you have Christian Gray, who is coming off of, his worst performance in a Notre Dame uniform, right? At times, his highlight plays were highlight plays. That you talked earlier about, Notre Dame's pick sixes, and it's not like a lot of them were making plays on the ball. It was just right place, right time caused by the pressure. I think the one pick six this year that was just a really good play on the ball was Christian Gray's.
Well, I didn't mean to say that they weren't making plays on the ball. It's just the balls weren't great throws that they had to make great plays on because they were just – it was the pressure forced them into some of those plays. But
that's what I'm saying. The one –
was different.
Yeah, that was the one pick six that I can think of that wasn't mainly caused by the pressure.
Well, and two of his almost pick sixes, should have been pick sixes, were also great reads on the ball where he was playing confidently and comfortably. He knew what was happening. He wasn't overplaying. He was trusting his technique. He was trusting the system, and he was jumping routes. I mean, he almost had two pick sixes against Texas A&M for that reason.
Man.
But you're correct. You're correct.
But my second one is Christian Gray. He's looking for a bounce back game, and he's finally – I think this time off got him back fully healthy. I'm willing to chalk up the USC performance as a wash because you go back through and you look at what the kid did all season, and he had been pretty locked down, pretty reliable. Gave up some things against Virginia. Malachi Fields is a really good wide receiver.
He's really freaking good, yeah.
So I think Christian Gray is going to be the other one. I was thinking about somebody to hold it down in the secondary, and at this point, I was going back and forth between the two corners because they're going to have their hands full with Omar Cooper and Elijah Surratt.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Christian Gray's kind of due for that. Hey, it's time to put USC
good
behind. Yeah. I'm good. So Christian Gray's my other one.
I dig it. I think you're on that. The corners have to be a big part of this game. They have to play well. They do, because that's how a 3rd and 9 turns into a 25-yard gain is because your corners aren't trusting their technique. Right. Or we saw this against USC. You make a stop on 3rd down, penalty, pass interference because you didn't trust your technique.
Yep.
And those are things that they're going to have to do a much better, especially Christian, because I thought Leonard Moore played very well against USC. Christian's been the one that's been a little bit more inconsistent. When he's on, he's a dude. I mean, there was people talking about how he might be better than Benjamin Morrison in the first 3-4 games of the season.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't necessarily agree, but I thought it was at least worthy of a debate. You know what I mean? So, those are all things that you look at and say, hey, man, you're going to have to be on top of your game. You didn't actually take any of mine because I had a feeling you were going to go with one of the D tackles, so I just assumed I was going to just not have them at the list. We talked about how important they are. I think the linebackers are super important, and I've been back and forth coming into yesterday's show when I was thinking about it of who I would go with because I think Drake Bowen could have a big impact in this game, shutting down the run. I could see Jaden Alsbury or Jalen Snead having huge plays on pass rushers. Maybe Jaden Alsbury making a big play in space. Like I feel like Jaden Alsbury is like due for stepping in front of a slide route for 6. Like, you know what I mean? Like but I'm going Jack Kaiser. And I don't know what it is, but I just feel like this is a big Jack Kaiser's just going to have that monster you always remember game. I don't know what it is. I'm not betting my mortgage on it. I'm not doing it. But it's just like when I look at what Indiana does, they're going to go after him in the run game. They're going to go after him in the pass game. They're going to challenge Jack. And this is a kid who's given his everything he has to this program. 6-year player, 4-year starter, captain on this football team. And this is that game where this kid wants to end his career with a win. And in order to do that, in a month and a half or a month, you've got to get that one at home. Last home game of his career. That's also why I'm kind of looking at Riley Mills and Howard Crosses and Xavier Watts and those type of guys who I'll get to in a second. This is their last home game. I think you're going to get their best version of them. And because we're not doing the senior day stuff and there's not all that distraction of senior day, this is, hey, we're going to make our statement. We're going to make our mark. And that's a big part of why I went with Jack Kaiser. And it's also why I'm going with my next pick. But I think they're going to need Jack to play well because I think Jack is probably their most consistent second-level blitzer. And at times this year, I didn't think they used him all that well and effectively, but lately I think he's gotten a lot better at it. And I think he's going to be a guy that's going to have a chance to have a very big game for Notre Dame when it comes to getting pressure on the quarterback, making plays behind the line, forcing them into mistakes. I just have a feeling that this is going to be a big Jack Kaiser game. I could be way off, Trev, but you know what I mean? Sometimes you just get those gut feelings, and you're just like, yeah, I think this is going to be a big game for this guy.
I love that
really big game, and I think Jack Kaiser's the one for me.
I love that pick.
There's another one. Trevor, you said it earlier in the show. Your dudes got to be dudes. And there is no bigger dude on the Notre Dame defense than Xavier Watts. I mean, he is your best player. They're going to go at him. They're going to probably beat him a couple times because they're a good pass offense. But this is those games where your best players have to be at their best. And this is another kid who's ending his career at Notre Dame Stadium. It's Friday night. This will be the last time he plays inside of Notre Dame Stadium. And he's such an important part of this defense. And for him, it's not even just what he does, it's making sure other guys are lined up, making sure other guys know where they need to be. It's that leadership aspect of it also. And then, the thing about Xavier that I love that makes him so special is not the production only. It's not the 12 picks. It's not the fact that no player in college football has had more interceptions the last 2 years. It's not that everybody except the idiotic Football Writers Association of America recognizes he's arguably the best safety in college football. It is that he is also clutch. He has his best games and some of the biggest moments. You know what I mean? And that's what I love about this kid is he's a clutch player, and he's never played in a bigger game than this one. And it's just very fitting for a guy like him to say, okay, I'm going to save my best for the biggest moment. And I think we're going to see that on Saturday, Trevor. I really think Xavier's primed to have a monster game. And they're going to need him to be a playmaker in this game. I mean, whether it's him making a play or him being where he's supposed to be and making a pick. You think of the interception he had against Louisville. Ball hits off the receiver's chest, and he's right there to grab it. I mean, that's what good players do. I mean, you're in position. You're not covering that guy. You're closing on that guy. You're squeezing off that zone, and when the ball's in the air, you go catch it. It's like there was a play like that against Michigan where they threw a ball and it hit off the guy's hands, and the Michigan safety was squeezing down and not in his zone, and he misses the chance to go step in front of that ball. Xavier's always where he needs to be. And I think in this game, he is going to be that guy. I thought about going to the Don Schuler in this game, honestly, because I thought like, hey, they're not going to go at Xavier as much. They're going to try to test a Don. And so I thought about a Don as well, but I'm going with the veterans in this one for that reason.
I love that choice. I really do, because, you go back through and you look at the common theme. Look, the common theme for this season for Notre Dame has been the journey that this whole team has gone on, right? And the first home game of the season, what was the question? Where are the captains? Where are your veterans? Where were they to step up in those big moments? And I think it's almost a poetic ending that their final game in Notre Dame Stadium in a Notre Dame uniform would be for the Howard Crosses of the world, Riley Mills, Jack Kaiser, Xavier Watts, to be like, here we are. You know what I mean? That would be such a great way to end their home career at Notre Dame. So I love that.
Well, and who was the one guy that we said did play well in that game?
Yeah, Xavier Watts.
Xavier Watts. He was the only captain where you looked at and were like, where are your captains? And Xavier Watts is like, yeah, for real. I'm the only one. I mean, he would never do that, but
right.
And he was the one that the one guy that did step up in that situation, Trevor, and was there to play. And that's why I say, like, you just feel like there's no way that kid's not going to be at his best on Friday night. And that's why I went with him. But it wouldn't shock me if it is a Drake Bowen. It wouldn't shock me if it was a Jaden Osbury. It wouldn't shock me if it was an Adon Schuler, because that's kind of how this team has been all year. It's those young guys that really step up and have some of those big moments. But I just feel like in this moment, your veterans step up and dominate. So your two guys, the D tackles, right? I mean, I went with Jack Kaiser. I went with Xavier Watts. The only young guy that we picked was Christian Gray, and it made a lot of sense to have that. So, I mean, that's where you're going to be. You're going to need your best players to be well. And look, what also helps in games like this, Trevor, is when some guy that you're not expecting to be a game wrecker steps up and is a game wrecker. And when you think about guys like that, you think of like an RJ Oben finally earns his, reputation. The Junior Tuihalamaka, you're like, man, I don't know if the edge rush can do there. And then Junior just has a game of his life, or Josh Burnham has the game of his life, or, it's not Riley Mills or Howard Cross that has that big money third down sack that puts the game away. It's Donovan Heinisch. You know what I mean? It's not Xavier Watts who has that big interception to help put the game away. It's Adon Schuler. That's what happened against Texas A&M. Yeah. It was Don Schuler who had the big pick that set Notre Dame up for a score in that game. So, it's Christian Gray, as you talked about. You're going to need some of those guys that maybe people aren't expecting. Jordan Clark makes a huge play in this game. Maybe it's not the big name guys that step up for the Notre Dame offense. It's not Riley Leonard or Jeremiah Love, or maybe it's Chris Mitchell. Maybe it's Eli Raritan, not Mitchell Evans, right? Maybe it's Cooper Flanagan has a breakout game and not one. You need those complementary players also in these type of moments to step up and say, hey, I'm going to play my roles well. And so maybe one of those guys is your game wrecker in this game. It's going to be fun to watch, man. It's going to be fun to watch. You're going to have a great view of it. I'm going to have a great view of it. I can't wait for it. It's going to be, it's going to be big. It's going to be big. Can't wait. Can't wait. Before we get out of here, Trevor, we do have a few super chats. We have one from Evan Schneider. Evan was trying to get us to talk about the hat. I said, I'm not going to talk about the hat unless somebody gives us a big super chat, because I just don't, not the hat. I'm sorry. The uniforms, the Notre Dame uniforms for the game. And I said, I'm not doing that unless somebody gives us a big super chat. And we appreciate your 99-cent super chat, Evan, but it is not enough for us to talk about the uniforms. Jack Frencho, thank you. Thanks for your help this morning, Brian. You're welcome, Jack. That's what I'm here for, man. And we're glad to get you back on the board and get that figured out. And then, of course, Iden Benami with a super chat. Iden says, might have missed it, but is Jadon practicing right now? I believe he did start this week. I believe. But I don't know that with 100% certainty, but I believe he did start practicing this week. I'll ask about that, to be honest with you. And I didn't even look at it the other day when we were at the practice, to be honest with you. I was thinking about a million other things, and I didn't even think about the fact that Jadon was supposed to be out there. So my apologies. But that's it for the super chats. A reminder, tomorrow, Friday, we will be tailgating in Joy Slot. I don't know exactly where we're going to be just yet. But actually we have another super chat that just popped up from my guy, Tyler Reese. Hey, Tyler, haven't seen you in a while. Thank you for super chat. What's the likelihood that Gabriel Rubio breaks out against the run game? I mean, he's been your most consistent run defender inside this year.
Yeah.
And so what's the likelihood? I mean, I think there's a chance. I hope he's locked in and focused on this game and what's happening in front of him now and not the future. But I wouldn't be shocked by it. I mean, you need him. I mean, he is your best run defender, in my opinion. He's your biggest guy. He's your strongest guy. I think there's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. So And they need them. I mean, Tyler, and that's kind of an example of what I was just talking about, like those complementary players. Who are the complementary players to step up? It's 3rd and 1, right? We talked about Pastors, 3rd and 1. And, they move the chains. They got a chance to go tight end, and boom, it's Gabriel that busts through and stuffs the running back at the line of scrimmage, right? That's what you need. And it wouldn't shock me if he has a big game against the run. Wouldn't shock me. He's had some pretty good moments before as well. Nita Beta with a super chat. Thank you, Nita. I'm excited about the uniforms. I wish I could be at the game. I mean, there's a lot of people that way, Nita, that want to be there. It's going to be such a great environment. It really is. I can't wait until, it's such a great campus on game day, Trev, but it's like, I'm curious what it's going to be like. It's a Friday. I've never been at a Friday night game at Notre Dame Stadium. I've never been at a playoff game at Notre Dame Stadium. Like, is it going to be just more electric than it normally is? Or is it just going to kind of be like sort of like the business type of thing that Notre Dame Stadium or Notre Dame has kind of turned into a little bit in recent years, where it's just not quite the same level of just energy that you maybe see at some other places? I think it's going to be a crazy environment.
I think it's going to be nuts. I'm going to sit back and count how many people I see that I know took a PTO day on Friday to make sure they're on that campus to tailgate, right? I mean, I am really, really excited to be up there, man, and to be a part of that environment. I've been a part of some fun ones, dude. Like, I'm 22 Clemson last year, USC. I was at the Ohio State game last year.
Yep.
I don't know. Maybe it's just wishful thinking, but I have a feeling that this one.
I think the tailgate thing, not our tailgate per se, but I think there's going to be a ton of people tailgating that aren't going to the game. I think the tailgate scene is going to be crazy.
Oh, I know a lot of people that are tailgating that aren't going to the game. I mean, weather aside, it's going to be nuts.
Oh, I can't
It's going to be so much fun.
I can't wait. We're going to have a ton of food. I'm excited about that. Jim on Sports, my guy Jim. How about now for the uniform talk? Sorry, buddy. $2 ain't a big super chat. We appreciate you, Jim. I appreciate you very much, man. But, at the end of the day, I have a strong opinion on uniforms, but here's what I care about. I care about them winning this football game. That's ultimately what truly matters, right? That's a side talk. What matters is go out there and win the football game. But I appreciate you, Jim, very much. And it was good seeing you at Original Pancake House the other day. And I look forward to seeing you up in the press box on Friday night, my dude. So I appreciate you, man. But there you go, Trev. I mean, that's it, buddy. We're excited about it. We're excited about this game. We're going to be there. We're going to be tailgating in Joy Slot. I'll tweet out when we arrive what the poll we're by, but we'll be in Joy Slot. We will have the IB flag flying. We do have that now. I didn't think we had a pole last time, but my dad actually came through in the clutch, brought a pole, and so we were able to hook up the IB flag to the pole. So we'll have that flying. So if you're walking around, it's not super, super high, but it's high enough where you'll be able to see it. We'll probably start at around 1 or 2 on Saturday or on Friday, a little about round 1 or 2. Our goal is to try to get out here around 12:30ish and then get set up. So again, I'll tweet when we're on our way from the house. And if anybody shows up where we are and wants to help set up, we would greatly appreciate that also. Would mean a whole lot to us. So I'm excited about it. Lots of great food, great time, great conversation. And there's still a lot of y'all that I've never met yet. So, Trev, I got to remember to bring name tags. Maybe that might be your responsibility. Buy name tags so people could put their handles on there and then their real names on there. So that'd be a lot of fun. I always say I'm going to do that, but then game day comes and I forget. So, Trevor, that's on your to-do list.
All right, you got it.
Things to do. Get some name tags, a stack of name tags so people can know. So,
you got it.
So that's where we're at, man. So, hey, everybody have an awesome rest of your day. We have IB Nation Sports Talk tonight here in about an hour. Trevor and I will be back tomorrow. We're going to try to start around 1. We're going to try to start at 1. I'm not for sure that that's going to be the case. They're hanging some carpet, but I think we're going to be able to get started tomorrow at 1 o'clock. We'll do our keys to victory. We'll do our game predictions. Bill will join me at a little after 2 to talk about the other 3 playoff games. And then Friday, Trevor, no show because we're going to be tailgating all day, and then we're going to enjoy the game. So can't wait to see y'all on Friday. But before then, of course, we'll see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock. The IB Nation Sports Talk guys will see you tonight at 5. Can't wait. Have an awesome rest of your day, everybody, and we'll talk to you again soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.